So to investigate the history of peanut butter cups, we really should explore the origins of, well, peanut butter. For without that key part, we would have nothing but a chocolate cup. And, we're not talking about those tasty little, chocolate molded cups that people make now to, fill with, liqueurs and puddings and stuff. Although, those aren't half bad, actually.
Yeah, without the peanut butter cups wouldn't really be chocolate cups so much as just chocolate blobs. Although, even a chocolate blob sounds delicious.
I could go for a chocolate blob right about now. Peanut butter is actually really interesting as a foodstuff. We're going to go a little bit deep on it, so it's going to take up most of the origin section just because, peanut butter is awesome. Who doesn't like peanut butter? So a couple of fun facts here. About 90% of households in the United States eat peanut butter. So, like we said before, everybody loves peanut butter. That's not hyperbole. That's a fact. 90% of households in the freaking country eat it. There's good reason for that, too.
Peanut butter is pretty good for you. It's absurdly high in protein for just being a tasty plant paste. Per weight, about 25% of it is made up of protein, and a standard serving of around 2 tablespoons of peanut butter gives you about 5 to 10 grams of protein, which is fantastic for such a small amount.
Yeah, protein.
In addition to its healthy protein load, it's fairly low in carbs, which is exciting for all the people who would rather bitch and moan about carbohydrates than actually, go perform physical activity to burn carbohydrates.
Yeah, I don't know. In the same vein as people losing their shit over carbohydrates, peanut butter is also loaded with fat. And yes, fat is actually a good thing. See now, to get dietary for a moment, contrary to decades of bullshit advice based on bad old scientific evidence, it turns out that most dietary fat is actually pretty good for you. Even some types of saturated fats actually have a place in a balanced diet. Then you got monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Those are just legit nutrients that you should be putting into your body the way that you put stuff like vitamin C and niacin into your body. These unsaturated fats, they overall lower your risk of cardiovascular illness, which is funny because for years, mistaken nutritionists were just telling you the opposite, that fatty foods cause heart problems. Honestly, it's mostly trans fats that are the big problem. Those are the ones you should avoid. Anything else, even saturated fats are generally safe to eat on a fairly regular basis, if you're eating it in moderation. So feel free to enjoy your butter guilt-free, just as long as you don't just power fist a whole stick of it into your mouth. But on the same note, due to the high protein count and fat content, peanut butter actually does tend to be very calorie dense for its volume. So generally speaking, America as a whole could, benefit from taking in fewer calories in general, but there are still some individuals who need extra calories. For example, elderly people, people that are recovering from surgery, or if they have illness or something and they're actively losing weight because they're malnourished. Peanut butter for them it's a fucking power food. Seriously, a few servings of peanut butter, it's an entire meal in and of itself.
Besides dietary fats, peanut butter has a bunch of other nutrients and vitamins in it, and even includes a bit of fiber as well. Is there anything it can't do?
Well, of course, to be fair, there are health advocates out there who like to soapbox about how most brands of peanut butter are junk food and it's not good for you anymore, and that you should instead just be eating sugarless, unsalted peanut butter because it's healthier. But to be even fairer, there's also health advocates who recommend inserting gemstones into your vagina because apparently it'll give you superpowers or something, so who's to judge here? Really, on a purely empirical level, yes, sugarless, saltless peanut butter is technically healthier for you than, for, example, good peanut butter that tastes good. But at that point, it doesn't really taste like anything anymore. So, the whole charm of having this super nutritious, protein-packed, awesome food stuff that's also really good and yummy, it's all lost on that. If you take out the salt and sugar from it, you know what you're eating? Ground up peanuts suspended in oil. So you know what that's going to taste like? Ground up peanuts suspended in oil. Salt and sugar aren't perfect, but really, they're necessary for a lot of things to be palatable and actually enjoy eating them. So just like we mentioned earlier, moderation is key. If you eat peanut butter with actual flavor in it, in moderation, it's not going to kill you. So keep slamming down those peanut butter and jelly sandwiches with no worries.
Actually, we've already spent so much time talking about peanut butter, but we should dig even deeper here. We should actually look at what peanuts really are. Because, alright, so fun fact. Everyone thinks peanuts are nuts since, they're peanuts.
Mm-hmm,
but
right.
Did you know peanuts aren't nuts.
Oh, really?
Is that common knowledge yet? Because, like, I'm pretty sure everyone's been corrected by someone at some point, but, you know, they're not nuts, they're legumes. Of course, that's such a pedantic baseline fun fact that anyone with a degree in fun fact studies would know, so...
Oh, but wait a sec. Fun fact plot twist. Peanuts are totally nuts. Don't let that old adage fool you, if you couldn't tell by our sarcasm here. All the actually nerds out there who go, oh, actually, they'll fall over each other trying to be the first person in line to tell you that peanuts don't meet the official scientific criteria to be referred to as a nut. However, like, this tipping of the fedora kind of just ignores that there are absolutely other plant families that produce nuts. Like, for example, my family. We're fucking nuts. Seriously though, namely, there's a subfamily which are referred to as ground nuts, which include peanuts among a few others, which, as their name suggests, are just nuts that grow underground. Culinarily and culturally, nut has a different meaning than the botanical definition used in science. Like, the definition of a nut in scientific terms is ridiculously restrictive. And, like, even then, there's a lot of things, like seeds, that are nuts, quote-unquote, but they're not even edible. Like, excluding, like, if you're just going to exclude peanuts from the nut party... I can't say that with a straight face. Peanuts in the nut party. I didn't know this episode was going to be so filthy. I don't know how many times I can say nuts over and over again without just cracking up.
Anyway, singling peanuts out is as this weird outlier from the hyper-exclusive definition of what constitutes a nut is just silly. You know what other nuts don't meet the hardcore scientific botanical parameters of a nut?
What?
Almonds, Brazil nuts, cashews, pecans, macadamia nuts, and walnuts. So, like, 75% of all the nuts that we fucking know aren't actually nuts. Oh, no! So, like, sorry food, no more nuts for you. Know what the only nuts we eat that are true nuts? Chestnuts and hazelnuts. That's it.
Yeah. Most nuts aren't scientifically nuts, but we have different varieties like tree nuts and ground nuts with different definitions. So, like, all right, the next time that someone goes, actually, peanuts aren't nuts, they're legumes, you fucking punch them in the face. And while they're on the ground, you fucking take out their phone, you look up the Fabaceae plant family, shove it in their faces, and then smash their phone on the ground because you are not fucking around here. Peanuts do not need any more shade thrown at them, I swear to God.
Joking aside, for real, peanuts are actually a type of plant known as a groundnut. These guys are interesting, because unlike most plants, they bizarrely grow their seeds underground attached to their roots.
Yeah, peanuts in particular, they're a type of shrub that are native to South America, which, hey now, like, this is 2 episodes in a row where we feature a food whose origins are from America. Well, okay, it's South America, it's not the United States of America, so let me change that to, it's a food whose origins are from the Americas.
There's archaeological remains of peanut shells found in Peru that show the plants may have been domesticated over 7,000 years ago. Early civilizations bred wild peanuts to create hybrids that were bushier and better for farming, with larger peanuts than its wild predecessors. From Peru, it spread to much of South America, including Brazil, Ecuador, and Paraguay.
Yeah, and then by the time that the Spanish conquistadors arrived around like the 1500s to crash the party for Mesoamerican civilization as they knew it, peanuts were a common crop for all of them. Most of South American peoples had it. It was brought back to Europe where it didn't really take off as much as you would think it would because peanuts are awesome. But randomly, it instead became very popular in Africa where it was very similar to a relative of them, the bambara, which is another type of ground nut. And it's actually pretty interesting because you'll see a lot of traditional African cuisine and dishes that include peanuts in them, despite the fact that peanuts are like a relatively young phenomenon on that continent. But it's because a lot of their cuisine was developed with ground nuts, the bambara, in mind. So when peanuts arrived and they become the more popular crop, it was really easy to just adopt their recipes that already use them to like use peanuts instead.
Bizarrely enough, peanuts were introduced to the U.S. from Africa, not the other way around. This actually blew our minds a little. Think about the freaking roundabout route those things took to get to the United States. They went from South America to Europe, which then started growing them as a novelty. And when they traded to Africa, they became popular there. And then African traders brought them back across the Atlantic Ocean to North America. So, like, basically, this would be like if you had a gift for your next door neighbor, so you hand it off to one of your coworkers, tell them to mail it to your sister so she can stop in at your town to drop the gift off at your neighbor's house. It boggles our minds.
Yeah. To be fair, though, like, even though it seems like it would make sense for, like, Mexican traders or something to just, like, bring peanuts up to the United States, the timeline of world events actually resulted in, like, that wacky world tour route to actually make kind of sense. Because the United States didn't really expand much into the Southwest until, like, the mid-1800s. But, like, by that point, Americans were already trading with Africa. So, yeah, in the end, I guess we were just, like, destined to end up with peanuts around that time, regardless of what happened. It was simply destiny. Speaking of which, by the early 1800s, peanuts were starting to be commercially grown in the United States, but it was mainly used as, like, livestock feed, and they were generally regarded as, like, food for poor people. So, honestly, that's a big whoops on their part, considering how nutritious and yummy peanuts are. Like, people are friggin' idiots. They were wasting it on cows and hobos. Just goes to show you, like, no matter how good a food is, depending on how it's marketed, you could sell it to anyone. Like, look at lobsters. Like, that's one of the poster child cartoon rich person foods now. Like, generally, you only think of people eating it who are, like, lighting cigars with $100 bills. But actually, for the longest time, lobsters were considered a trash food that nobody wanted because they were just these big underwater monster bugs that, like, live in the mud. I guess it just took someone suggesting that you serve it by dipping it in liquid butter to make people actually covet lobster as a dish. So, you know what, I'm going to go back on what I said. It doesn't have to do with who you try to market stuff to. It's what you can serve covered in melted butter. Am I right?
Actually, peanut butter doesn't contain butter, but it does contain the word butter. Is this the secret to making food sound appetizing, is just associated with butter?
At any rate, peanuts got a boost in popularity in the late 1800s when circuses began serving them as, like, a cheap, tasty show food, like, kind of similar to popcorn.
The real breakthrough for peanuts, however, came a few decades later, and it's all thanks to a man named George Washington Carver, who didn't actually invent peanut butter. That's right. This one was actually a little bit of a surprise. I feel like it's one of those things you pick up in school that no one ever really fact checks. Like, we've been lied to all these years.
Yeah. To be fair, even though Dr. Carver didn't invent peanut butter, he was a big advocate of peanuts being used in foods in general, and he was one of the most prominent scientists to support the idea of making them a staple crop in the first place. This was a big deal because in the early 1900s, there was a surge of weevils, a type of grain pest. They're a tiny little bug that just, like, bores holes and stuff. They began wiping out cotton crops in the southern states at an alarming rate. And, you know, as we all know, if there's one thing that the antebellum South liked more than cornbread and lynching, it was cotton. Cotton was a hugely important crop to the point that a lot of states in the South had their entire economies revolving around it. So, like, when these weevils showed up basically being like, hey, fuck you guys, we're going to eat all your cotton crops. Well, that was like an apocalyptic scenario for a bunch of states that just finished up the Civil War, which is a different apocalyptic scenario for them. Luckily, though, Dr. Carver and other advocates of peanuts were very successful on this, and a lot of farmers in the South started growing them in, like, high numbers. It was almost to the point that they flat out replaced cotton as their main export for a while.
As this was going on, peanut butter was also quietly being invented in the background, thanks to another important peanut player, John Harvey Kellogg. And yeah, that's the same Kellogg guy who invented Kellogg's cereals.
Yeah, so in 1895, Kellogg was awarded the very first United States patent for creating peanut butter when he discovered that grinding up the nuts with oil into a paste could serve as a helpful protein substitute for people who didn't have teeth. And no, that's not a made-up fact that way. It sounds like a joke, but seriously, go back to how we mentioned that, like, peanut butter and peanuts in general are just, like, really nutritious and tasty. So, you know, now what if you got a bunch of medical patients who are missing their teeth and they still got to get food in their bodies? Well, this is before IVs and feeding tubes were a thing, so that was off the table.
Kellogg and some other physicians started making peanut butters to provide a nutrient source for people who couldn't chew solid foods anymore. If you think for a moment, back in the 1800s, let's just say dental hygiene wasn't particularly well established at the time. Probably wasn't too common for people to lose probably wasn't too uncommon for people to lose most of all their teeth by the time they were in their 60s or 70s. And at that point, a nice corn on the cob is pretty out of the question. But while they had sad shit like gruel and porridge, maybe some of these elderly people wanted something that, you know, featured a flavor. So peanut butter filled that niche quite well, to the point that it spilled out to the general public.
Yeah, come to think of it, you don't see a lot of people with dentures or no teeth in general anymore. Is that like a reflection of, like, widespread dental care now? Like, Are dentures gonna fall by the wayside? Who's worried about the dentures industry? Come on, wake up, people! Big dentistry is making it so that hard-working tooth craftsmen and the makers of Polygrip are all gonna lose their jobs. It's time to make America toothless again. We can't let that industry go. It's too big and important. There just ain't enough meth addicts out there to sustain them for another 10 years. Who's with me?
Is this another thing millennials are going to get accused of killing, the denture industry?
Yes, exactly. Millennials killed doorbells, and they killed motorcycles, and then they killed dentures. Anyway, peanut butter took off in the early 1900s, and it didn't really take very long for it to become an American fixture.
Now then, chocolate meanwhile, we've covered the advent of chocolate before, so we don't really need to focus on it too much, but let's look at a brief history of chocolates in terms of candies and miniatures.
So as mentioned in previous episodes, chocolate is originally from South America, much like peanuts themselves. It's interesting to think that this perfect pair started off in the same regions before their holy matrimony in the 20th century. And actually, much like peanuts, chocolates were introduced to the rest of the world after the Spanish brought it back with them to Europe during the Age of Exploration. Wait a sec. So just like peanut butter, modern chocolate was invented in the mid-1800s as well. Wow, man, it is so beautiful to think that these two perfect foods are basically just like twinsies. They're cut from the same cloth. They both left and did their own thing for a few centuries before they reunited in North America with the dawn of peanut butter cups. It's like the greatest romance story never told. Which one do you think would be the top and which one would be the bottom?
Chocolate would be on top because peanut butter is the filling of peanut butter cups.
Wait a sec, but if peanut butter was inside the chocolate, then... Actually, you know what? Never mind. This candy introspective has already gotten enough innuendo after we talked about nut parties.
Anyway, British chocolatier Joseph Fry, no relation to professional douchebag Stephen Fry, is credited with inventing the chocolate bar in 1847 when he figured out that he could make a chocolate paste with cocoa powder and sugar and mold it into a bar shape.
Yeah, prior to this, cocoa powder is mostly just used as like a flavor, or was like in baked goods, and the concept of just, well, chocolate didn't exist yet. So even though we like to talk shit about Britain's spotty history of cuisine all the time, we are in their debt for chocolate bars at the very least. For more rare glimpses of us not making fun of terrible, terrible British cuisine, go check out our chicken tikka masala episode of Deep Dish. Actually, wait, no. We still made fun of British food a bunch in that episode, so... Oh well, if you haven't listened to it, go listen to it anyway. It's a lot of fun. A couple years ago, after inventing the plain chocolate bar, Mr. Fry then invented the very first candy bar kind of chocolate bar. In 1849, he created the Fry's Chocolate Cream Bar, which is just a chocolate bar filled with like milk cream inside. And that product became incredibly popular because of fucking course it did. It's the world's first chocolate bar. Duh.
Chocolate bars underwent some processing and preparation advancements over the next 50 years, which helped to make them easier to produce and improve the texture. Namely, the Swiss chocolatier Daniel Peter teamed up with Henry Nestle to invent milk chocolate, where they discovered they could make a creamier, smoother chocolate bar if they used powdered milk, which Nestle was claimed for.
And then by the end of the 19th century, chocolate bars were already a big market in Europe, so they made their way over to America pretty quickly, and, well, the rest is, well, history. So that should wrap it up for today's topic. Until next week, guys, happy Halloween. No, but seriously, chocolate and peanut butter were both getting popular in the US around the turn of the century, so once again, it just seemed like destiny that they would team up sooner rather than later. So let's get nitty and let's get gritty, because now it's time to take a look at the history and development of today's topic.